The sound of the front door closing was not a bang, but a soft final click. It was the quietest sound, yet it echoed through the entire house, through me. I stood in the center of the living room, my shadows stretching long and thin in the fading evening light. The air was still thick with the scent of sandalwood incense I had lit just an hour ago, a futile attempt to bring a sense of peace to a home that was crumbling. My fingers, which had been nervously twisting the gold bangle on my wrist, stilled. In that profound silence, a single thought screamed in my head, so loud it was deafening. What do I do now? The life I had known, built, and nurtured for 28 years had just ended, not with a dramatic fight or tearful farewell, but with the gentle, devastating latch of a door. My husband, Rohan, was gone. He had packed a single suitcase, his movements efficient and devoid of emotion, and walked out. He didn't look back. And I, a woman of 47, was left standing alone in a house that suddenly felt like a museum of a life I no longer recognized. The carefully arranged furniture, the family photographs on the mantelpiece, the faint hum of the refrigerator, everything was the same, yet everything was terrifyingly different. I was an anchor that had just lost its ship, adrift in a vast silent sea. The weight of the future, a shapeless, terrifying thing, pressed down on me. I remember thinking, this must be what it feels like to drown in air. This is the story of how I learned to breathe again. My name is Anjali. For as long as I could remember, my identity was a beautiful, intricate mosaic crafted from the roles I played for others. I was Rohan's wife. I was Priya and Rahul's mother. I was a dutiful daughter-in-law. Our home in a quiet, tree-lined Delhi colony was a universe unto itself, a vibrant, noisy, and loving chaos. Mornings began with the rhythmic grinding of spices from the kitchen and the rich, comforting aroma of ginger tea. The days were a symphony of school bells, office calls, and the familiar clatter of pots and pans. Evenings were for homework, the rustle of newspapers, and the gentle hum of the television. I was the conductor of this symphony, the quiet, steady force that ensured every note was in its proper place. Rohan and I, ours was a marriage of quiet companionship, or so I believed. We had met through our families, a match deemed suitable, and over the years, we had built a life of comfortable routines. He was a successful, disciplined man, an architect who built structures of steel and glass, while I built a home of love and memories. We were a team, or so the picture in my mind told me. I managed the household, the finances, the children, the endless social obligations, all while he focused on his career. It was a division of labor I had never questioned. My world was within these four walls, and his was outside. I took pride in my domain. The perfectly polished floors, the well-stocked pantry, the neatly folded clothes, these were my accomplishments. My self-worth was inextricably tied to the smooth functioning of this home and the happiness of my family. When Priya and Rahul left for college, a quiet emptiness descended, but Rohan and I were supposed to navigate this new chapter together. We were supposed to rediscover each other, travel, enjoy the peace we had earned. That was the plan. The fault line I see now in hindsight was not one of loud arguments or visible cracks. It was subtler, more insidious. It was in the way Rohan started becoming more preoccupied, more distant. He would spend longer hours at the office, his phone always closed, a new password protecting its screen. When I asked about his day, his answers were brief, dismissive. "You wouldn't understand the stress, Anjali," he'd say, a new phrase that had entered his vocabulary. "It's a different world out there." I accepted it. I told myself it was the pressure of his work, the natural ebb and flow of a long marriage. I poured more energy into my home, my garden, my weekly kitty parties with the neighbors. I filled the silence with activity, unaware that the foundation of my life was quietly eroding. The entitlement was not loud or aggressive. It was a quiet assumption that my world was small, my needs simple, and my existence would forever orbit his. He was the sun, and I was the loyal planet, my path predetermined, my light merely a reflection of his. The betrayal did not arrive with thunder and lightning. It came on an ordinary Tuesday, wrapped in the mundane act of checking our joint bank account to pay the electricity bill. I logged in, my mind already on the list of groceries I needed to buy. The numbers on the screen didn't make sense at first. I blinked, thinking it was a glitch. The comfortable balance we always maintained, the cushion for emergencies and future plans, was gone. The account held just enough to cover the bill in my hand. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, trickled down my spine. My fingers trembled as I navigated to the transaction history. And there it was. A series of large transfers over the past 3 months, all moving to an account whose number I did not recognize. The final transfer, a sum so large it made my breath catch, had been made just 2 days ago. It had cleaned out the account almost entirely. This wasn't a mistake. This was a systematic dismantling. I called Rohan, my voice a shaky whisper. "Rohan, the bank account. What's happening?" There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear the faint sounds of traffic, the impersonal world outside. When he spoke, his voice was flat, devoid of any emotion I could recognize. "Anjali," he said, his tone as calm as if he were discussing the weather. "We need to talk. I'll be home in an hour." That hour was the longest of my life. I sat at the dining table, the printed bank statement staring up at me like an accusation. I felt a fool, a trusting, naive fool. When he walked in, he didn't look at me. He went straight to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and then finally met my gaze. His expression was not one of guilt or shame, but of a strange, weary resolve. "The money is safe," he began, as if that was the primary concern. "I've moved it. I've also taken a loan against the house." The words landed like physical blows. "Why?" was all I could manage to whisper. He sighed, a sound of immense irritation. "Anjali, you live in a bubble. The world is expensive. Investments are needed. I'm securing our future, my future. You don't need to worry about these things." And then came the sentence that shattered my reality. "Besides," he said, his eyes finally holding mine with a cold clarity, "I've met someone. It's been going on for a while. She understands the pressures of my world. This chapter of my life is over." He gestured vaguely around the room, a gesture that encompassed me, our home, our entire life together. He had not just taken the money. He had declared my entire existence obsolete. The man I had shared a bed with for 28 years was a stranger, and he had just handed me eviction notice from my own life. The weeks that followed were a slow, suffocating descent into a reality I could never have imagined. The financial strain was the first, most tangible chain. Rohan had been true to his word. He left me with a bare minimum, a monthly allowance that was a fraction of what we used to spend on groceries and utilities. It was a calculated act of control, designed to keep me dependent and compliant. I remember sitting at the same dining table, a pile of bills and my calculator before me. The numbers didn't add up. They would never add up. I had to choose between paying the full electricity bill or buying the medication for my blood pressure. I stared at the receipt from the chemist, the digits blurring through unshed tears. I had never looked at the price of my own medicine before. The house, once my pride, became a prison of echoes. The rooms felt too large, the silence too loud. I started eating my meals standing at the kitchen counter, unable to bear the emptiness of the dining table for one. A simple bowl of dal rice would go cold as I lost myself in a vortex of fear and what-ifs. The food tasted like ash. The social isolation was another layer of this new, harsh reality. The phone, which used to ring constantly with calls from friends and family, grew quiet. Whispers travel fast in a community like ours. I was now a subject of gossip, an object of pity. My kitty party friends, women I had known for 2 decades, suddenly became busy. Invitations to weddings and festivals dried up. I was the abandoned wife, a bad omen, a reminder that their seemingly perfect worlds could also crumble. I felt like I had a contagious disease. The most painful pressure, however, came from my own family. My in-laws, whom I had cared for like my own parents, called me, but their concern was laced with accusation. "Anjali, beta, what did you do to drive him to this?" My mother-in-law asked, her voice sharp with worry. "A man doesn't just leave a comfortable home. You must have neglected him. You should have tried harder, been more understanding." Their words were like salt on an open wound. The narrative was being rewritten, and I was being cast as the villain in my own life story. My children, my pillars, were far away, building their own lives. When I called them, I tried to keep my voice light, to pretend everything was fine. I didn't want to burden them, to become a source of their pain. But they sensed it. "Ma, you sound tired," Priya would say from her hostel in Bangalore. "Is everything okay with you and Papa? He seems different on the phone, too." I would weave a web of lies, my heart breaking with every cheerful reassurance. "Everything is fine, Betty. Just a little tired. You focus on your exams." Hanging up the phone felt like severing a lifeline. The pressure built in small, cruel increments. A notice from the bank about the loan he had taken, a letter I wasn't even supposed to receive, a chance encounter with a mutual friend at the market who awkwardly looked away. The way the vegetable vendor, whom I'd bought from for years, now looked at me with a pity that felt like a slap. I was cornered. Emotionally, I was a ghost. Socially, I was an outcast. Financially, I was teetering on the brink. I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and more invisible with each passing day. The woman who once ran a household with confident efficiency was now afraid of the mailman, of the ringing phone, of the setting sun that promised another long, lonely night. I was drowning, and no one could see it. The turning point, as it often happens, arrived not with a fanfare, but in the quiet, dusty confines of the attic. It was a Sunday morning, 2 months after Rohan had left. I had decided, with a heavy heart, to start sorting through old things, to begin the painful process of dismantling the life we had built. Maybe I thought by confronting the past, I could find a way to face the future. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and memories. I was going through a box of my late father-in-law's belongings, things Rohan had never bothered to look through. Beneath a stack of his old yellow textbooks, my fingers brushed against the cool, smooth surface of a leather-bound folder. It was out of place. I pulled it out. It was not my father-in-law's. It was new. My heart began to beat a little faster. Inside, I didn't find sentimental letters or old photographs. I found a different kind of story. There were property documents for an apartment in a trendy, new part of the city, purchased a year ago. The buyer was Rohan Mehra. There was a life insurance policy I had never seen, with a staggering sum assured, and the nominee was not me or the children, but a name I did not recognize, Miss Naina Kapoor. And then, tucked into a clear plastic sleeve, was a single printed photograph. It was of Rohan, his arm wrapped around a young, smiling woman. They were standing on a balcony, the city skyline behind them. He was looking at her with a fondness I hadn't seen in his eyes for years. The balcony, I realized with a jolt, was the one from the apartment in the documents. I sat back on my heels, the cool, dusty floorboards pressing against my knees. The pieces of the puzzle, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the distant behavior, all snapped into a devastatingly clear picture. This was not a recent, impulsive affair. This was a calculated, long-term plan. He hadn't just left me. He had been building a parallel life, a new future, while I was obliviously living in the old one. He had been securing his assets, building his new world, with a cold, surgical precision. But as I stared at that photograph, at the evidence of his betrayal, something shifted inside me. The paralyzing grief and fear began to recede, replaced by a slow, steady burn of anger. It wasn't a loud, screaming anger. It was a quiet, focused flame. For the first time, I saw the power balance for what it was. He thought he held all the cards. He thought I was weak, ignorant, and dependent. He thought he could leave me with nothing, and I would simply fade away. But in his arrogance, in his meticulous planning, he had made a mistake. He had left a trail. He had underestimated the woman he had been married to for 28 years. He had underestimated the quiet strength that comes from running a household, managing budgets, and solving 1,000 small crises. He had built structures of glass and steel, but I had built a life. And a life, I was beginning to understand, is a far more resilient thing. The power did not lie solely with the one who held the money. It also lay with the one who held the truth. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not pick up the phone and confront him. Instead, I took the leather folder, went downstairs to my study, and placed it carefully on my desk. I made myself a strong cup of tea, my hands remarkably steady. Then I began to plan. This was not a war of emotions. It was a battle of strategy, and I would fight it with dignity and resolve. My first move was to find an ally. I needed legal advice, but from someone I could trust implicitly. I thought of Mr. Malhotra, my father's old friend and a retired lawyer. He had known me since I was a little girl. I called him, my voice calm and measured. I did not divulge everything over the phone, simply said I needed guidance on a personal matter. When I met him at his quiet book-lined office, I laid out the entire story, showing him the documents I had found. He listened, his expression growing graver by the minute. "Anjali," he said finally, his voice kind but firm. "What he has done is not just morally corrupt. There are significant legal implications. The joint account, the loan against a jointly owned property without your consent. We have a strong case, but you must be prepared. It will be difficult." I nodded. "I am prepared." With Mr. Malhotra's guidance, I began my quiet countermove. I became a student of my own life. I spent days in government offices, a world I had never navigated on my own, collecting copies of every document related to our assets, the house deed, vehicle registrations, tax returns from years past. I learned the language of legal notices and financial affidavits. It was exhausting and often demoralizing, but with every document I procured, I felt a piece of my power returning. I opened a new bank account in my name only at a different bank. I started stashing away whatever small amount I could from the meager allowance Rohan sent, a secret fund for my independence. The most difficult part was telling my children. I invited them home for a weekend, something I hadn't done since their father left. When they arrived, their faces were etched with worry. I sat them down, held their hands, and told them the truth. Not the angry, bitter version, but the factual one. I showed them the documents, explained the situation calmly. "Your father has chosen a different path," I said, my voice soft but unwavering. "And I need to secure my future now. I need you to understand that this is not me being vengeful. This is me surviving." Seeing their shock and anger was painful, but their unwavering support was my greatest strength. "Ma, we're with you," Rahul said, his jaw set in a way that reminded me of his grandfather. "Whatever you need." I also reached out cautiously to a few old friends. Not for pity, but for potential opportunities. I met an old college friend, Sheetal, who ran a small but successful catering business from her home. Over coffee, I confessed my situation. "I need to find a way to earn a living, Sheetal," I said. "I've been managing events and cooking for large groups my entire life. Could I help you?" Sheetal looked at me, not with pity, but with respect. "Anjali, your hands make magic." "Of course. Let's start you off with a small wedding order next week." My plan was not for revenge. It was for reclamation. I was not trying to destroy Rohan's new life. I was trying to rebuild my own. I was gathering my resources, my documents, my allies, and my own hidden talents. I moved quietly, deliberately, like the tide, slowly and inevitably reclaiming the shore. The confrontation, when it came, was not in a dramatic courtroom. It was in Mr. Malhotra's office 3 months after I had found the folder. Rohan was there, looking irritated and impatient. He had been served a legal notice regarding the joint assets and the unauthorized loan. He had expected a weeping, helpless woman begging for alimony. He did not expect the woman who walked in, dressed in a simple, elegant sari, her head held high, a folder of documents in her hand. I was calm. I had rehearsed this moment not with words, but with breath. "Anjali, let's not make this messy," Rohan began, his tone condescending. "I'm willing to give you a fair monthly maintenance. You can keep the house for now, but let's be reasonable." Mr. Malhotra cleared his throat. "Rohan, this is not a negotiation about maintenance. This is about the illegal transfer of funds from a joint account and the fraudulent loan obtained against a jointly owned property without my client's knowledge or consent." Rohan's face tightened. "Fraudulent? That's a strong word. I am the primary earner. I manage the finances." That's when I spoke, my voice quiet but clear, cutting through the stuffy air of the office. "You manage them into an apartment for your mistress, Rohan." I opened my folder and slid the photograph of him and Naina across the table. Then I placed the property documents next to it. "And you manage them into a life insurance policy where she is the nominee." The color drained from his face. He had not anticipated this. He had thought his secrets were safe, that I was too naive to find them. He looked from the documents to me, and for the first time, I saw not coldness, but a flicker of fear. He had underestimated me, and now his meticulously built new world was threatening to crumble under the weight of its own deceit. Mr. Malhotra laid out our position. We were not asking. We were stating. We had a clear legal path to reclaim 50% of the liquid assets he had transferred, to have the loan declared null and void, and to claim my rightful share in all our marital assets, including the value of the new apartment, which was purchased with marital funds. There was no shouting, no name-calling, just the cold, hard facts of the law, which I had armed myself with. The consequence of his actions landed on him not as an emotional blow, but as a financial and legal avalanche. His carefully constructed facade of the successful, in-control man cracked. He was cornered. The power balance had not just shifted. It had been overturned. He had seen me as a dependent, but he was now facing a strategist. The climax was not an explosion, but a quiet, definitive click, the sound of a lock turning, securing my future. The aftermath was not about victory, but about settlement and peace. We avoided a long, drawn-out court battle. Through our lawyers, we reached a settlement. I received my rightful share of all our assets, a lump sum that secured my financial independence forever. The house remained mine, free and clear. The legal process was draining, but it was a catharsis. It was the process of legally untangling a life that had already been emotionally severed. With the financial security came a newfound freedom. I continued working with Sheetal, but I also started my own small venture, Anjali's Kitchen, creating personalized spice blends and homemade pickles, something I had always been famous for among my friends. It started small, with orders from the kitty party circle, but soon grew through word of mouth. The women who had once pitied me now looked at me with a new respect. I was no longer the abandoned wife. I was Anjali, the entrepreneur. I set firm boundaries with Rohan. Our communication was now only through lawyers or, when necessary, brief and factual emails about the children. I did not badmouth him to Priya and Rahul. I allowed them to have their own relationship with him, free from my bitterness. That was my small act of grace. It was not for him, but for my children and for my own peace. One afternoon, about a year after he had left, I was in my kitchen, surrounded by the warm, aromatic scent of roasting spices for a large order. The sun was streaming in, illuminating jars of vibrant red and yellow powders. My phone buzzed with a notification of a new bank transfer, a payment from a happy customer. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of contentment. The silence in the house was no longer empty. It was peaceful. It was mine. I had not just survived. I had rediscovered myself. I had found an identity that was not tied to being someone's wife or mother, but simply to being Anjali. The closed door that had once symbolized an ending, I now saw, had actually been an opening. It had forced me to step out of the comfortable, confined space I had lived in and into the wide, uncertain, but ultimately liberating world. The lesson was etched into my soul, not as a scar, but as a testament to my own strength. Sometimes, the most beautiful opportunities are hidden behind the doors you never wanted to see closed. If this real life story resonated with you, if you've ever faced a closed door that led to a new beginning, I invite you to share your own reflections in the comments below. For more calm, empathetic stories of resilience and quiet strength, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening.